Hello everyone. Any questions before we start? So today is going to be a shorter lab. Let's first start with some reminders. So for now, there is the due date for implementation stage 1. So you are creating the database file, the SQL database file, and you also need to put some example entries in all of those tables. So we expect like at least 5 entries per table, and you will be able to use those entries while testing or working on your database in the further steps. And like I will try to give feedback for implementation stage 1 this night. So after the due date, I will like try to give the feedback immediately, and then we have the implementation stage 2. We are going to assign, and like there is going to be information for that, but let me like shortly talk about that. In the implementation stage 2, we expect you to choose one of the scenarios. So for now you are given 3 scenarios for each of your project topics. So let me actually get to the project topics document. So for each of the project topics, there are 3 different scenarios, and in the final demo you are going to complete these 3 scenarios. But for the implementation stage 2, you are going to choose only one of them for now. So this is like a beginner step. So as a starting step, you are going to choose one of these scenarios and you are going to implement in Python. So we expect you to use PySimple GUI library for the user interface. So it should be like a small complete program for one of the chosen scenarios. For example, for the travel agency, you might choose the first scenario. For example, it says login as a customer, then you need to design some login page, and we should be able to log in as one of the customer users. List all tours with their total prices, for example. While listing, you can use a list box. So we expect you to use the suitable elements for the user interface, and you are going to also use the SQL tree library to manage your database. So you will have the UI portion, the user interface portion, and you should also write some code to interact with the database. And actually today we are going to have some examples, very similar examples like that. And for the implementation stage 2, we actually want you to record a small video. It is going to be similar to what we are going to show today, and it will be also like a short final demo. So in the final demo, we are going to arrange a meeting, and we are going to meet through Zoom with your group. And in the final demo, you will like showcase your end product. You are going to, like, for example, open it up, log in as one of the users, and you are going to like add some data, update some data, and those scenarios are the ones that we gave to you. And today, if you look at the lab's homepage, for lab material for this lab 6, we have a database. So we also have the Jupyter Notebook, and there's also the Python version of this lab as well. And if you download and open them up, the lab6.db, this database file, should be contained within the same root folder. So we have this ipynb, the Jupyter Notebook file as well. So if you open it up, we have scenarios here as well. So this is actually, if you remember from the earlier labs, we had like students enrolling to classes, and like teachers were teaching some courses. We had advisor relationship, etc. We designed a database for that. We create the database as well, and then this is going to be our scenarios. For example, these scenarios might not cover all the tables you have. So in the final demo you are just responsible for these scenarios, these given scenarios. If you are able to follow this scenario and like show it in the demo, that's fine. So for example, in the corner there could be some tables that you designed in the ER diagram that you created and put some data in it, and if they are not contained as a scenario, you don't have to do anything for such tables. So for this one, let's go through the scenarios. So we have login as a teacher, list courses that are taught by this teacher, choose one teacher. So we have a listing portion. So we need to be able to show the teachers or the courses that are taught by some teacher, and that teacher is actually the teacher that we log in as. So such things will be also in your projects. So we are going to choose one teacher. So these are like sometimes can happen in separate windows. If you want to like combine them, they could happen in the same window as well. But at least we actually need some login page, and then after we log in for different options, you should have some sort of navigation, right? Something like a main menu, and from that main menu you can open different windows and like do the functionality in there, and those windows could like combine some multiple functionality. For example, here choosing one teacher and listing the students enrolled in the chosen course. So this should be actually, I guess, list courses that are taught by this teacher, choose one teacher, but I guess this is like choose one course. I thought I fixed that, but we are going to choose a course and we are going to list the students that are enrolled to that course, choose one student and update the grade of the chosen students. For example, this is like a complete thing. We actually perhaps want to update the grade of a student, but to choose that student, we first find the course, and then within that course we list the students that are enrolled to that course, and we are choosing the student to update his or her grade from that list. And if we are like just showing something or listing something, list box can be used. If you want to be able to choose among a set of options, you can use the combo elements or the list box elements. So those are up to you. So the second one, login as a student, list courses of the student with their grades. So for example, in some parts, while listing something, we also need to be able to show multiple attributes of it. So we are listing the courses. For example, we need the course code, but we also need to show the grade of that student. So list all available courses and then choose one course to enroll in. So these two sentences kind of like together. So we list the courses, and among that list, we need to be able to choose one thing and enroll this student into that course. So another is login as a user. So this time this is like a common scenario for teachers and for students. So for both of these types of users, we should be able to do that. Show messages sent to this user, list all users, choose one user to send a message to. The date of the new message should be today. So for example, in this scenario, we are sending a message to some other user, and one of the attributes are going to be the date of today. So in the last lab, we actually had some examples for that. So in this Jupyter Notebook file, we actually have two cells. The first cell is to get some example data from the database. So just a small reminder, perhaps. We were using the SQL tree library. We were connecting to an existing database. If in the folder this file does not exist, then it creates that file. So one thing you should be careful about. So if the correct file is not in the folder, it will create it for you, but then you do not have the user tables within that database file. So the database file you create in SQL Studio should be put in the correct folder. So with this connection, we are just executing some SQL queries, we are getting the results and printing out those results. So if I run this cell, you will see that we have a bunch of teachers and students. So these are the ID, name, and passwords of those users, and I'm going to use it for like login scenarios. So to log in one of the as one of the users, for example, I'm going to use the ID plus the password of that user. And in your scenarios as well, you can like put these example users into some parts so that you will have like easy time to find the information. And don't try to like have very long passwords for this example data, so it will be better if it is easy for you. So let me first run this second cell, and this is going to be our complete program. We are going to look at the steps, look at what we have here, but I'm going to first show that how to go through the scenarios. So for example, for implementation stage 2, we are going to actually, we did not like post the assignment yet, but we are going to ask you to record a short video. So it will be like at most 5 minutes. So it can be told by one of the members. So you don't have to all like appear in the video. You don't have to show your faces, etc. Just the screen of your computer plus the perhaps the voice can be helpful. And we are going to go through the scenarios. For example, I'm going to like do some similar thing now. So our scenarios, login as a teacher. So first I'm going to log in as a teacher, and in the implementation stage 1 video you are going to do it only for one scenario. These are my teacher accounts. For example, if I'm showing some success or error messages in the video, it is better to show them as well. For example, what happens if I leave these text boxes empty? It says ID cannot be empty. I'm going to write some ID here, and then it is going to ask me to write the password as well. So let me write some password. If I try to log in, since this combination is not an existing user, it's going to say that ID or password is wrong. So now let me write the correct information. For user with ID 1, who is Josh, the password is A12. Then I'm able to log in as Josh, and it shows that this is a teacher account. So if I click on the OK button, this puts me into the main menu for a teacher. For a teacher, we should be able to list the courses that are taught by this teacher. And we decided that, for example, put this in the student grading scenario. So this is actually like a scenario for grading a student, an individual student. But while doing that, we are going to also list the courses that are taught by this teacher, Josh. So if I click on the grade students button, we are put to a different window. And in here we have a combo, and within this combo we actually only display the courses that are taught by Josh. So Josh was teaching math, science, and biology, for example. If nothing is selected and if I click on list students, it is going to give an error message. It's going to say please choose a course. So if I go and click to my courses, for example, if I choose math, then if I list the courses, so these are the students that are taking math course, and like their IDs, name, surname, and at the last line or the column we show the grade, the current grade of the student. So if it is none, it writes none. If it is some number, it also displays that. For example, if I choose the science and list the students, so these are the students that are taking the science course, or I can do it for biology. So let's say for the science course I would like to give the grade of N rubbers. So I'm going to choose that, and for the grade here, for example, let me try to write a very big number. When I click on the update grade button, it is going to say that grade should be in 0-100 range. So if I write something else, it gives me an error. So let me type something, some text value. It says this time grade should be numeric. For example, such error and success messages are good for you, so you should like try to include them. So let me write a valid one. So it says successfully set grade to 89, and whenever I click the OK button, I will see that the grade is also updated on my screen. So if I try to write a grade and try to update the grade, it also reminds me that I need to choose a student first. So let's say for an existing grade, Nicholas, let's say we would like to update the grade to a lower one, we can do that. So this is one scenario, right? And if you are able to like do every sentences, and if you give some correct or useful user-friendly messages to the user, that's okay for us. So one other thing, your choice of UI elements should be suitable. What that means is, for example, in here, while listing the courses, while selecting the courses, I use the combo. I can also use a list box, but the input element, for example, for writing the grades, I use the input element. For choosing a course, it's not that useful, right? If I have to write the name of the course, if I need to type that, it's not that user friendly. And also for choosing the grade, if it's a combo or a list box, it will have lots of lines, right? So choosing user friendly elements are going to be about that. And you should also have some good navigation, meaning that so we are in this window, we should be able to somehow go back, otherwise we are stuck here, we need to like close the application, etc. You need to like include some return to main sort of buttons to your window. So in here as well I have the logout option, or I can go into like some other window again. So this is just one scenario, and in implementation stage 2, we just expect you to complete that portion and record a short video for it. You are not going to like upload your code, etc. And you don't need to show your code in that video recording as well. It will be just about the functionality. And in the final demo, it is going to be very similar, but this time for all three scenarios. So you are going to do the similar thing, but then this time you will do it on Zoom. So it will be a meeting with your all members in it, because we would like to be able to keep track of who is still continuing to the project, etc. So let me also show the other scenarios. So for example, in here it says login as a student, but before that, okay. For the first scenario, we also had insert a new student where the advisor is assigned as the teacher that we log in as. So let's do that. So we have the button to go to that menu, insert new student. So for inserting this new student, we just have a bunch of input fields. So we need to write the name, surname, and scholarship of the student. We have the insert button. If some of these fields are empty, it is going to give us the error messages. Let's write Ali, for example, and then it says surname cannot be empty. Let's write the surname, and then we can insert, but it says please write the scholarship amount. Write 0 for no scholarship. So if you remember, while designing the ER diagram, or while creating the relational schema, we decided to make the scholarship not required. So it did not have the not null constraint. Name and surname has it. But then in the UI part, we decided that, okay, if we need to have 0 scholarship, we can just write the 0 scholarship there. So like these are like some options. Either way is good for us. So in here, we decided to make the scholarship required, but if that student has no scholarship, then you just write 0 here. Let's write 0 there. I click on insert, and then while inserting some new data, if you are auto-generating or finding the next available IDs, for example, in here we are doing that. For this new user, we generated the ID automatically. We just looked up the ID numbers, the maximum one, we find that, we add 1 to that, and the ID of this new student is 17. And for the password as well, we automatically generated this password. For example, let's say the teachers, the advisors are creating the accounts for the students, and when we did that, we have some automatically generated ID and also a password for that student. Perhaps when we give this account to the students will be able to change the password, for example. So I'm going to show the auto-generating password thing as well. But to show that, let me like make up some other user and insert it. So this time the ID is 18, and for this new user we have some other password. For example, for this user 18 B3B2A, I can go back, or actually let me okay, so let me actually get out of the program then. So I wanted to like keep the ID and password there. So I'm going to also I could have like click on the logout. I should have done that maybe. I stopped the kernel. If you stop the kernel, then for the window it is going to like shut down automatically by the OS. But let me actually, okay, let me look something. I guess since we interrupted here, so that's actually one reminder for you as well. Remember, if you do not commit, the changes are not applied on the database. So there will be like multiple places that you can commit. So after a successful insertion, it is actually a good idea to commit. But while testing your code, so if you are like using some risky code, for example, if you have the chance to delete everything on your database, etc., then it might be a good idea to like keep the commit part for the last part. And in this code, actually, we just have this con.commit line at the end. And because of that, I inserted a new student, but then I just interrupted the kernel so that we did not commit the changes. So if I look at here, actually, the students that I inserted are not there. So I'm going to rerun the second cell, which contains our main program. I'm going to log in again as Josh, and then I'm going to insert a new student. So let me do the same thing. I'm going to insert, successfully inserted. I'm just doing this to remember the password. I'm going to close it like without interrupting the kernel, so it closed like successfully. And then if I rerun this first cell, I see that this new student is there with the password. And actually, if I run the program again, I'm actually able to log in as this new student with the automatically generated password. So in your implementation stage 2 recording and also in the final demo, it's actually a good idea if you are like creating or inserting some new data in the demo. If you are able to use that information, that will be even better. So I created a new student in my application and I just logged in as that student. And we have this my courses portion for a student. So this student is not taking any courses. We just created this student. And if I list the available courses, so these are like the first we have the course code, the name of the course, and then the teacher's name who is teaching that course. For example, Josh is giving maths course, so I can enroll to this math course. I'm going to choose that, click on enroll button. It says successfully enrolled into math, and it also displays my new course here. My grade from math is none currently because I just enrolled to that course. While listing this available courses, we are actually looking at which courses this student is currently enrolled to, and we are excluding, for example, the math for now. Let's also enroll to some other course. For example, if we are already enrolled to a course, then we are not displaying it for the available courses list. So let me return back to the main menu. And we also had, if you remember, for those different kinds of users, we should be able to show the messages sent to that user. So we have the message board page for that. And currently, since this is a new user, we don't have any messages, but we can send a message to someone. For example, let's choose Josh and let's write something, testing 1, 2, 3. Send message to Josh, successfully sent. I click on the OK button. If you remember, by design of this database, we decided that we should be only able to send a message to a particular user once on a particular date. So today I send a message to Josh, and I'm not able to send another message to Josh again today. Tomorrow I can send, for example. But on the same day I can also send a message to somebody else. So successfully sent. So let me return and log out, and let me log in again with Josh information. If I log in, and if I go to the message board, in here I will see that if I go down the list, Ali Mali send a message, and if I check the date, it's the date of today. And if I choose that, and if I click on the show message button, I see the content of the message as well. So in here I can choose one of the messages, click on show message, and it's going to show up the content of that message. And then in the same window we can send message to other people as well. So in this one we decided that messages appear on the same page that we send messages. So in the same page we can send messages, or we can list the messages that are sent to us. We decided that when we click on one of the messages, with a button click we can show the content. But this can be designed differently, right? We could have a large list box, and for each of the content of the messages we can also put the content of a message next to the title, for example, next to this date, etc. So these are some options, and like as long as it does what the scenario says, that's going to be enough for us. So this is going to be like depending on the scenario. If it functions correctly, and if it is user friendly, meaning that I'm using the correct user interface elements. So for example, in here, while choosing my message, I directly choose it from the list box. One other option could be I could have some input fields, and in there I could expect to write, for example, the ID of the message, for example. That's another option, but that's not that user friendly. So while doing it, this is a good example. You can like follow the analogy of this example. And one other thing as well. So let me go back to the message board. For choosing the receiver, so actually if you look, the ID of Josh is actually 1, ID of Charlene is 2, etc. But while listing here, we started with the order number. So these are actually not the actual IDs of the people. These are like the order numbers. Because of that, when we choose the line, we need to keep a list or a mapping from order numbers to ID. In the last lab as well, we had an example for it, and you can use the code from these examples. So you can reuse these examples in your projects and in some other places as well. So now let's go through the codes. I'm not going to focus every part, because like in the last lab we actually covered all the UI elements, etc. How to design our layouts, how to create the windows, how to like define the functionality for the buttons. So this is actually using the same knowledge, but with a more complete application. In here we have a bunch of global variables. So when we start the application, or most likely when we enter the login information, among different windows we might want to keep track of some information. So the user ID, the name, and for example the type of the user could be such things. For example, when I log in as Josh, I'm going to keep the ID of Josh in this global variable. I'm going to keep the name of Josh, for example, because like in most applications, when you log in, it is going to write your name in some corner, and to get that name, we don't need to actually interact with the database all the time. At the beginning we can get the name, and like after that, while we are navigating from or within these different windows, we can just use the same name, because the name of the user is not going to change with navigation. Keeping the user type could be important as well, because when we log in, according to the type of the user, we are going to do different things. So I'm going to first look how we are distinguishing these different types of users. So we define functions for creating our windows. So this is like the login window, for example. In login window, we display some static text to the user, and we are using some input fields to get the text input from the user. And if you remember, we need to define some key if we want to acquire or get the value of some of the items. So for example, for the text that we are writing, that static text, we don't need to get the value of it, because the user is not going to write anything for that. It's going to be like it can't be changed by the user, right? But this input elements, we expect the user to write some information there, and we need to like assign some key values for these so that we can like get the values out of them. And we have the buttons. For buttons, the name of the button is going to create an event whenever we click on it, and in our main loop we can like get that event and call our functions. So each of these are actually doing similar things, but sometimes within our window we need to get information from the database and put that information to some UI element. For example, while showing the enroll window, so the student can enroll to some courses, we need to also show the current courses of the student. So the courses list is going to keep the courses that this student is enrolled to. So this is the query for that. We are using the enrolled and course tables. We need to make the join operation, if you remember, otherwise it makes the Cartesian product. This is our join condition. We are projecting the course code, description, and the grade of a course. And at the same time, our condition saying that SID of the student should be equal to the value that I'm giving. And if you remember, the execute function receives a tuple as the second parameter. A tuple in Python is a bunch of items, right? But it is not going to change during runtime. So because of that, we are giving it as a tuple. And each of these items will replace the question marks that we have in the text portion or in the string portion. So the number of the elements in our tuple and the number of question marks should match up. And even if we are giving just one value, it should be in the tuple form. These parentheses and this comma symbol is doing that for us. And then the result set that we get from this execution, for each of these lines, we are appending it to the courses list. So we interact with the database, get some information from the database, but we are keeping the information in a Python list. In the database, actually, we could have more information. For example, for the courses, we can have like additional information. We just project some useful set of it. So in here, we just need the course code, description, and grade, for example. We just get that information, put that to the list. And for this, we are going to actually put that list to a list box. So this list box includes the courses, for example. The other one is for showing the available courses for the student. So these are the courses that this student is not enrolled to. So we can still enroll to these courses. So this in this one we use the subquery. In the subquery, what we are projecting is the course code from the enroll table for this student, right? For SID is equal to this login user ID. We logged in as one of the students, and for the students, this subquery includes the courses that this student is enrolled to. And the courses that I would like to list should not appear in this subquery. So for these course codes, my course code in the other query should not be in this subset. And for these, we actually also want the instruction information. And because of that, we have the course and user tables. So we are joining them through the instructor TID should be equal to the ID of the user. And we are displaying the course code, description, name, and surname information. We append these information to our list boxes, and in our layout, we are actually giving it to a combo this time. And one like small detail about listbox versus combo was that in listboxes, by default, we can only choose one item, but there is also the option to choose multiple items, and because of that, when we retrieve the value of the listbox, it is actually a list of items. We are dealing with like we are mostly choosing one of the items in the listbox. Because of that, we need to index the return value with the 0 index. The combo, with the combo, we can only choose one item. It doesn't allow us to choose multiple items, and because of that, it is just returning the value of the item that you choose. So this was like a slight difference between the listbox and the combo. So for other windows as well, we have similar things. And for the window message, for example, this is for our message board. In the message boards, if you remember, we have the messages and we also keep the contents. And because of that, actually, we would like to store the contents of the messages in two different lists. So for the messages, we are keeping the let me come to here for okay. For example, for a message, what we need to store or show is the name, surname, and date. And the content of the message is actually the attribute message. So I'm appending the order number. So if you remember, we need some ordering in list boxes to be able to correctly choose the items. So actually it will be better, I guess, if I show it here. Okay, it was once, I guess. So in the message board, if I look at the message board, I have a bunch of items here. And for each of these items, the content is on some other list. And I need to be able to somehow relate each of these titles or the sender name plus the date with the content of a message. And to do that, I decided to give an order number for each of these lines. So if I go back to my query, in here, this is my query. I get the name, surname, date, and message. So for a message, actually, the sender ID plus receiver ID plus date is the primary key. So our primary key has three things, like three attributes. But instead of using them all the time, I get all the messages sent to this user. So how do I do it? Let's look. So from the user and send tables, I join them through ID equals sender ID. And in here, I'm not going to display all the messages. I would like to only display the messages where I'm the receiver. So the receiver ID should be equal to this login user ID. And for this, instead of writing the sender's ID, I join with the user table so that I can display the name and surname of the senders. Also, I get the date and the message. I append this information, and in the messages list, so this messages will be the list box that I have here. I also append the order number. So in here, for example, if we start from 1, during my loop, I increase the order number by 1 each time. I append the name, surname, and date information here, but I append the contents on a separate list. Then, whenever I choose one of these lines, so whenever I click on the button, I have access to the contents that I have here. So I have access to tree, Harry Morris, and this date. And from that tree, I can actually map that tree to an index for my content. So it makes my life easier. So that's why most of the time it is better to assign some order numbers to that item, those items as well. So in here we have like also the user list. So this is going to also use a ordering starting from 1 again. If you remember, these are not the users IDs. We decided that we should not maybe show the users IDs to everyone. We are giving some new order numbers. We are showing the username and the surname, for example, here, or the name and surname of the users. And this is actually doing the similar thing. We are appending to the users list, and users will be sent to the list box directly, and we have the user IDs on a separate item. And from this ordering number, we can directly find in which index our user ID that we would like to use is included in. So this is the layout. We just give the list variables to our list box and combo items. We have a bunch of buttons here, input fields, and text areas. So we have the button functions here as well. So in here, actually, one thing, why content is global, maybe I should also mention that. Content is global because whenever I choose one of the messages, when I click on the show message button, a different function is going to actually display the content of this message. So some other function needs to access this content. Because of that, we decided to make the content global. And similarly, user IDs is global because like whenever we choose some user, so while sending the message to the user, whenever I click on this button, it is going to call a different function. So that different function is going to require the user ID, and because of that, this user underscore IDs is also set as global. So if you remember, if I define some variable within this function, its scope, its accessibility is within this function only. So for example, messages is defined within this function, the block of this function, and I cannot refer to messages in some other place. So in here, I cannot directly refer to the same messages. But if it is a global variable, it is going to be, for example, in here, if I write content, if I'm executing this line after calling this function, so let's say this function is called, it finishes, it has created the global content, it set its data in here, for example, while appending these rows, then at the end, in some other scope outside this function, I can still access to the same variable. So that's one like a detail to remember about. And one other thing with Python, if we are just accessing something, if we are not setting its value, it is going to be automatically the global one. So for the variables that we are setting its value, for example, we say content equals something. Because of that, if I want the global content, I need to write it explicitly. But if it is not setting the value, if it is just using the value, for example, the login user ID. So I'm writing directly login user ID. Within this function, I did not write global login user ID. But because I'm not setting its value to something else, I'm not writing login user ID equals something, it is going to be the global one automatically by default. So actually, let's continue in here and let me show the login function. So while logging in, or while making this login operation, we need to find out a matching ID plus password. So ID and password should match at the same time. So for that we have this area, right? We have some if, elif, else structure. We show some pop-up messages to the user. So For giving success or error messages, the pop-up function was very useful. You just give a string to that, and it is going to display that string to the user with an OK button. Whenever we click on that button, it disappears. So we say that, okay, the ID and the password fields should not be empty. And then, if they are given, we first check whether this is a valid user or not. So we had students, we had teachers, but both of these are actually users. So in the hierarchy, we had the parent user. Because of that, we check whether this is an existing user in the user table first. So it should be an existing user information first. So if it is, we retrieve the ID and name for the given ID and password information. So these should be the UID and UPass. These values should be equal to the ID and password respectively. We just fetch one result. So if you remember, we had different ways of retrieving data from the database using SQL tree library. We can like execute and get the iterator, and within a loop we can iterate over the result set. We also have the fetch one function. It is going to return just one, the first entry in our result set each time we call the fetch one function. And since this is the login information, we actually expect only one user to match with this information. It can be 0 or 1. It cannot be more than 1 because ID is the primary key of the user table. So for the same ID, I can only have one entry or 0 entries. So if the password is not matching, if there is no such ID, we may get none as well. And because of that, we first check if this result we get from row is none or not. If it is none, we say that ID or password is wrong. You need to like enter some other information. Or if this is an existing user, if you remember, we had some global variables for login user ID and login username. If this is an existing user, we keep these values in our global variables. And then we need to decide which type of user we have. So how to find that? I log in as a user. I have my ID. Then I'm going to check the student table and the teacher table for this ID. If this ID can be found in the student table, I can say that, okay, this is a student account. If I cannot find it here, I look at to this teacher table. If I can find it there, I can say that, okay, this is a teacher account. If I cannot find it in both of our tables, then like according to our application's restrictions, maybe a user can be neither a student nor a teacher. So that might be possible as well. We can display some information related to that. Or maybe we have the restriction saying that every user should be either a student or a teacher. Then maybe something went wrong while creating this new user. We can display some error message. We can say that, okay, something wrong happened while creating your account. You need to like contact to the manager, etc. So in here, if when we get the ID, we try to retrieve the SID from the student table. If you remember, we merged the tables. This naming was for an example because we merged the student and advisor tables together, but like keeping the names simple is better always. This is the student table. So for the student ID, for the students, student's ID, SID should be equal to the UID that we are given here. So this is the UID of this user, and we are checking if we can find it in the student list or not. So if it is not a student, what we get here is, so let me zoom right there. If this is none, what we get from is none, then this means that this is not a student. So let me first look at the else part. In the else part, this is a student, right? Row student is not none. It contains one value. Then what I do, for the user type, I assign it to the student string. So let's actually use our time and continue. We are going to finish early today. So we are setting the student, or we are setting the type of this user as student. We display a pop-up message. So we are saying, okay, welcome username, you are a student in parentheses. We close the current window and we open a new window, which is the student menu. So going back, if this is not a student, if the student row is none, it can be still a teacher, right? We need to check the teacher table. And this is exactly the same thing for a teacher. We are trying to find the teacher TID, where this TID matches the user's ID. We again fetch one row. If the teacher row is also none, this means that this is not a student, this is not a teacher, then maybe we are displaying an error message. There is some error with the type of your user. If row teacher is not none, this means that there is some teacher with this information. We set the login user type to teacher. We display the welcome message. We go to the teacher's main menu this time. And why we keep the user type? Because while navigating, so let me come back to here, while clicking on the return to main button, if I'm a teacher, this returns back to the teacher's main menu. If I'm a student, the same button, the same functionality will return me to the student's main menu. So for this option, we are actually using the login user type. So this is for enrolling to a course, and it's actually very similar to what we have done before. Most of the time, whenever we click on some button, we would like to do some functionality. Most of the time we have some return values from our UI elements. For example, I'm passing these values as a parameter to this function. So I need some new course to enroll to, and for this new courses information, I get it from this values. My key for this combo is called available courses. So from the available courses combo, I choose one course. This is my course. If it is empty, if it is nothing, I need to choose something there first. If it is not empty, I acquire the code of this new course. So if you look, actually, when we log in as a student in the combo while choosing the course, we display the course code, the name of the course or the description, plus the teacher's name and surname. So this new course actually contains multiple columns, and from this first item, the index 0 item, I get the course code. And then we insert this new course for the enroll table, and these two question marks will be replaced by the course code and the login user ID, which is a student. So for this student, let's enroll to that course. We display the successfully enrolled into that course message, and then most of the time, after managing the database, we need to update some UI elements. And these are actually using the same approach when we first created the window, right? If I go back, for example, for the enroll window enroll. So while creating this window, we need to get the courses the student is enrolled to. We need to get the available courses for the student. So in this button's functionality, we fill these lists again. But the difference is that we need to access some existing UI elements and call the update function of it. So if it's a list box or if it's a combo, we set its values. If it's a text item or if it's an input item, we set its value. So there's a slight difference about what we set. If it has the potential to contain multiple elements, there is the S, the plural letter there. And we are getting it from the window. So window is the window that we are currently in. The element function is going to retrieve one of your UI elements. And because of that, actually while creating the layout, if you look for this enroll, so this is a combo, right? Its key is available courses. When we choose some element, some line of this combo, we use this key to retrieve the value. We can also use this key, the same key, to update the values that are contained in the item. So in this update part, we are actually doing that to update the available courses for the student and also the current courses of the student. So the second part is like retrieving the courses of the student again, because when we enroll to a course, one course from the available courses list will go to the current courses list. So list students, so these are doing similar things. For a teacher, when we choose a course, we list the students that are enrolled to that course. We have some insertion part, and within this insertion part, we are mostly checking whether some of the fields are empty or not, whether they contain the correct type of information. For example, the scholarship should be numeric, right? The function to check whether a string is numeric or not is this is numeric function. If it is not numeric, we display a message. If it is numeric, then we need to like put it into an integer format or to some other number format, because what we retrieve from the input areas are always string. So if we retrieve the information from the database, it will have the correct type. For example, if we get the number, it will be in a number format. But what we get from the input area, so the user types something from the keyboard, it is a text, it's a string. If we would like to do numeric operations on that, we need to convert it first. So this line is doing that. Then we can check whether something is larger than equal to something, etc. Then, for example, in here, what we are doing is, so this was for inserting a new student. We need to generate a new ID for this new student. To do that, we look up into the users table. We find the maximum ID. We fetch one result, because this is going to return the result of a function, which is always going to be one thing. So that's why we are using the fetch one. You can use like different ways of fetching data in here as well. But if it is none, this is most likely not happen, but it can happen when there is no user in the system. So if there's no users in the system, then we do not have any IDs there. The maximum of it is also going to be nothing. So this is only for that. Otherwise, we calculate the new ID as the result that we get. So we get the result in row. But this has the potential to project multiple attributes. Because of that, this is a list. And I need to go to the 0 index of that list, and I just increase it by 1. I don't need to convert it to an integer, etc., because from the database it will already come in the number format. And for example, you don't have to do such things, but in here we decided to generate random strings for the password. And this is like a nice way of doing it in Python. So there are like different ways, but we are using the string function. So we have the empty string. We use the join function for that. And we are going to join this empty string with a random choice from this other string. So random.choice some string is going to choose one letter from the string, but we are going to do it for I in range 5, so it's going to actually do it 5 times. We will have a random string of 5 characters. Then when we have all the information, also the new password, we are going to insert this information to the user table. For these each question mark, we are going to replace it with the correct index of our tuple. So if you remember, while creating a type of user, for example, at top, the user was the parent, but we would like to actually insert a student. I need to first insert it to the parent table, which is the user table. So I first insert it to the parent table, and then I need to insert it to the student table as well. So I'm going to insert it to the student table, and if you remember, we actually log in as a teacher, and we are going to actually assign the advisor of the student as the teacher that we logged in as. So because of that, this new ID is the calculated ID for this new student. We have the value of the scholarship, plus this login user ID is used for the advisor ID, advisor TID. The advisor of the student is going to be the teacher that we logged in as already. And since only a teacher can use this function, it will function correctly. So whenever I use the login user ID, it's guaranteed to be a teacher because only a teacher can come up into this functionality. And then we have our display message, successfully inserted the student. And then sometimes, for example, for inserting multiple data, I might need to clear my input fields as well. In here, you might see that for name, surname, and scholarship, these are the input fields that I have. I'm setting or updating their value as the empty string. So this is like for updating grade, and it is actually very similar to our examples from the previous lab. Maybe wanting to be careful for the course, it is a combo. For the student, it is a list box. So this is this distinction. So the course returns only the row that we have, and we are going into the first index to get the course code. For the student, it is a list box. It has the potential to choose multiple rows, but by default it only chooses one. The first zero index is because of that, and the second zero index is from the student line to get the student's ID. And then we like execute some queries, etc. So this is for showing a message. For example, we get the content from this global content variable. If you remember, we were keeping the contents in a separate list. We just need to find the index of the content that we need to show. So this message actually retrieves us the order number, right? The chosen was the order number. If we get nothing from here, if this chosen is has zero length, we need to say that, okay, please choose a message first. Otherwise, this chosen, we are choosing from a list box, right? Because of that, I need to do two indexing. The first one is to like go to the row, and then the first index was the order number for that message. So actually, let me show it quickly. Not the grading, but for messages. So if you remember, this is a list box. I can by default only choose one row, but because of that, there is the option to be able to choose multiple rows there also if you like manage the settings. Because of that, whenever I choose a line, the first zero index is for going to that row, and that second zero index is to get the order number. And if you remember, order numbers in here, we start from 1. You can also start from 0, that's totally okay. But to map it to an index number, we just decrease 1 from that value, and then in a pop-up window, we display the content of this message. So sending a message, very similar to what we have done previously. This also we did it in some other example, but in here we are using it as a value that we send to our query. And this is our main loop. In here as well, I'm going to show one more thing. So in our main loop, we always retrieve the events and values from our window. So whenever a button is clicked, we get out of this function. Then we check the event, and if, according to the value of the event, this is the name of the button, the string that is included on that button. I'm going to do different functions. I'm going to call different functions. If it involves changing our window, I need to first close that current window and then open a new window. I was using functions for that. If I just need to do the functionality, for example, showing the messages, this time I call that function. I pass my values as well. So this is the values that I retrieve from the window. If that function is going to require that, I'm sending the values as well. But for creating a window, I don't really need the values, so I'm not sending it as a parameter. So these you will decide it according to the needs of the function. But for some specific events, for example, return to main, this does different functionality according to the user type. So in here, I'm checking the user type. Because for every return to main button, I'm actually using the same event. So if you check here, in the teacher window, in the message board, I have return to main button. So message board has return to main. Grade students has return to main. Insert new student has return to main. If I log in as a student, there I also have the return to main buttons, and they have exactly the same name. And because of that, whenever I click on this button, I catch this event, and I need to do the different thing according to the user type. So I'm checking the variable login user type. If it's a teacher, I open the teacher menu. If it's a student, I open the student menu. If it is nothing, most likely, hopefully, it should not be nothing. It should be either a teacher or a student. But if this happens, we just go back to the login page. So this is like some error prevention. So if I click on the logout button, I close the current window and open the login window again. But I'm like, to be safe, setting the ID, name, and type of the user to -1, to some nonsense value. Because, for example, let's say something happened and I'm on some page, I click on the logout button, then somehow if I'm able to open the other page, if the ID is still my value, then it is going to function for my ID. So while logging out, this is like very simple safety measure, let's say. We just set or reset the ID, name, and type. So these are like global variables that are used in our application. Then if the event is the close event, the close symbol that we have on our window, then we break out of this loop, going to here to close the current window. We commit our changes and close the connection. So if you, for example, want to commit after successful insertions, you can do that by like, if you copy this connection commit code, for example, one place you can put it to after your success messages. So you are saying, okay, successfully sent, then let's commit our changes. So I called an insertion query, for example, or an update query. I said, okay, you successfully set your grade to some value. I can commit here as well. So this is like something that you can do. If you are just running some tests on the database, it might be better idea to like keep the commit part to the last stage. Maybe in your first code you might have no commit as well. But remember, like when the application is ready, when you are sure it works, you should have the commit functions appearing in multiple places. So that's going to be it for today. Any questions or problems about the lab, or it can be also about the projects? Okay, done. So remember, we have this due date for implementation stage 1 today, and I'm going to like quickly give you the feedback, and we will assign the next stage. And for this next stage, implementation stage 2, you are going to like choose one of your scenarios. Those scenarios are very similar to what we have looked today, but for your project topic. And you are going to like implement a Python code for that with an UI, and then you are going to record a short video for it. So for example, login as a stalker. I have the login window, let's say. When I click, I might display a menu, or it can be included in the same window. In some portion, I will list the brands. I'm going to choose one of the brands, and for that brand, I'm going to list the products in that brand. For example, I'm from the second list, I'm going to choose a product, and I'm going to update its stock amount and price. So I need to be able to give a stock amount. So I need another list box, some input field, and for the price I need another input element. And I need to be able to create a new product as well. Maybe this can happen in a different window, for example, to not to crowd things up. Or perhaps for the chosen brand, so I previously chose a brand, I can create a new product for that chosen brand. But to create a new product, I need to know the attributes of it. So I'm going to have some input areas to retrieve that information. There is list all one-time jobs of this stalker as well. This can be some other window, for example. So these are just what's required, and it's up to you how you like implement them. It can be in different windows, etc. Any questions or problems? Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. So this is actually our last lab, and next time we are going to like meet in the final demo. So see you later. Görüşürüz. Hoşça kalın. See you.